Going into the topic of today, this is about sharing your entire experience of the training, your preparation for the Viva, attending the Viva, sitting the Viva, and then passing the Viva to becoming a QP today. So at the start of that journey and going into your training, what were the sort of common challenges that you were facing during that period?
So I think for me personally, and I believe a lot of training QPs will maybe sympathize with this, I think there are a couple of key challenges, and time constraint being the key, I think, because a lot of us are tackling full-time jobs and
Yeah,
of course family responsibilities, and we are doing training on top of it all. And especially with jobs that are quite dynamic and demanding, it's actually quite challenging to do everything at the same time and try to do it within a small time constraint. And then, of course, within the family life and the private time, there is a lot of dedication needed and time to allocate to the training and revision. And that certainly for me was a challenge. And finding a balance between the work and training and private life, I think it's really important to find that balance earlier on, unless until the end of the study and pass the Viva. Otherwise, it may actually become quite difficult,
yeah,
not only for the trainee but also for the family members and friends.
yeah. So the time management is essential, is key to get
Yeah,
right, to able to
absolutely,
balance family,
absolutely.
work, your studies.
Yeah, I think setting for me personally, but then everyone will be different. For me personally, setting myself extremely tight time frames, borderline unrealistic, it was also a challenge because for some reason I thought, oh yeah, I'll be able to do it in such and such time. But actually, when it came to the study and when it came to the revision and absorbing this vast amount of knowledge, it it actually takes much longer than anticipated because there is so much knowledge to be absorbed and understood. So I think maybe setting the time frames which are realistic is also helpful.
Yeah. So is this something that you discussed with any QPs around you before you started your training, just to understand, okay, how you should manage your time?
Yes, of course. There's been a constant supportive network from
Yeah.
the QPs and from colleagues and from management and also from from my partner and private life to sort of find that balance. It's important to allocate sufficient time for the training and do it appropriately with the company being fully abreast
Yeah.
of what's happening and making sure that the duties don't suffer, but the training is also being given some priority.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you were prepared and you understood exactly what you'd be walking into and how to then structure your time to balance that work and family life.
Yeah, and I think later in the process, at the beginning is not so hard because it doesn't seem so daunting at the beginning. But when it comes to last modules and a Viva, it then becomes a lot more. There is a lot more pressure, and there is of course the time pressure that we put on ourselves. There is a deadline on which we wanted to apply, and there are all those almost artificial deadlines that we've put on ourselves that are then hard to meet, and that may cause some stressful situations. But all those deadlines and they need to be revisited accordingly
Yeah.
and need to be adjusted to the pace of learning.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. And were there any other sort of challenges that you were facing at the time of your training?
Yeah, I think there were a few challenges. I was so engrossed in absorbing the knowledge. I was so keen in learning all the books and learning all the guidelines and finding out all the minutiae detail about the different subjects that uh, I was I neglected starting the application. And I
Okay.
think this was the key for me to recognize that if I was to do it again, I would have done it differently. But I've started the application late in the process, and it was actually really quite hard and time consuming to then go back to the modules I've already done and almost backtrack
Right.
what
Okay.
I've already learned, and then having to put it on the application. I was then discovering that, well, there are actually a couple of gaps that I thought I already covered, but yet they still there. And it was almost, it happened too late. I wish I started proactively and very early in a process. And I wish I've done it module by module, and I actually focused on the application, because the application itself is a very important document. It's a to-do list. It's a list where we can tick off all the study guide experience and practical exposure and knowledge. And I think the key is the to-do list. And I highly recommend to all training QPs to start it before any modules are taken and do it module by module. It's going to be a lot easier.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's interesting. Yeah. So initially, you neglected the application as you were so focused on just acquiring the knowledge during the training process. So you had to backtrack, as you say.
I had to backtrack, and I found that it was more time consuming, and it was harder then because, of course, 6 months later I didn't quite remember the
Yeah.
minutia of the modules that I've studied. Of course, I have the study materials, but it's just taken longer unnecessarily.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's really good advice then. So for anyone who's about to start their training, is that don't neglect the application form. Actually focus
Yes.
on that.
Yes,
On that
by
process.
all means, start it before going to your first module.
Okay. Excellent. So when it came to actually preparing then for the Viva itself, and the experience you went through, apart from what you just mentioned, what other advice would you provide?
So I think, again, as I mentioned, have a look through this QP study guide. It's an essential document. And of course, once the QPs will look at the study guide, they'll realize the vast amount of knowledge and the tremendous level of detail that needs to be acquired. And obviously, the scope of the QP study guide is very broad. And prepare the list of all the essential concepts and modules, which ones you need to do, especially the areas that you need to know thoroughly and in details. Particularly, for me, I prepared a list of all the key things that I need to absorb, and I split it into almost like a study plan. And I followed that study plan to the best of my abilities with the time constraints given. And the study plan was shifting. Of course, it was shifting because, for example, I thought perhaps I will spend Saturday on water system and then Sunday on stability. But actually, I required the whole weekend for the water system because there is so much to learn and absorb with that, together with the qualification and so forth. So there is, I think there is maybe a tip for the new QPs to prepare the list of everything that's essential in terms of modules and concepts and subjects. Have a plan, a study plan, know what you're doing when, or what is your, best guess plan in terms of your timing, and simplify all the concepts, consolidate. I think the key in here is that we study for years, and bear in mind there was also the whole vast decades of our experience that we pour into this training. So, and then we study for years for the QP. So the Viva only takes 2 hours, and in 2 hours the assessors will expect us to demonstrate our knowledge and understanding of the entire study guide. That's not a long time. So my tip to all the new QPs particularly is to simplify all the concepts that you are learning. Simplify and consolidate it. Map it, bullet point it, do whatever work for you, and understand the concept and understand it top level. Because on a Viva, when the question comes in, you won't have time to go into details. you will only be able to give the top level understanding. And actually, on my Viva, I pretty much spoke in bullet points because that is how much I needed to cover to feel satisfied with answering the question comprehensively. And on top of that, I think it's important to answer comprehensively, succinctly, but also logically.
Yeah.
The assessors need to follow your mind, and your mind needs to be organized. It's very difficult coming to the Viva with this vast, tremendous knowledge that we acquire over the years and try to say it simply and say it succinctly as well. It's hard. And I think the study, the practice bit is really important. The Viva, the mock Viva questions, practicing with your sponsor, practicing with other QPs and other training QPs, and having that network. Because answering Viva questions is something completely different. It's very unique, the process in itself. So a good friend of mine, a QP, actually told me as I was studying, and he was extremely helpful. He said that if you can pick up a really complex subject and simply and logically explain it to your partner or to your child, obviously
Yeah.
without traumatizing them too much, then you understand it. And
Yeah.
if you understand it, then that's all you need to do. Because on the Viva, the questions are structured in a way that they test your understanding. So, quoting the guidelines verbatim may not be the best thing on a Viva. So, submit your QP registration really early on as well, so that you can receive the application template in accordance with the new process, and try to see the wood from the trees. Every subject is so vast and so broad. And if there is any tip for training QPs, it would be just ask yourself, what are the risks? Where are those risks? And what's really important in this subject? What can actually affect the patient safety? Because there is so much information out there and so much detail, and you simply won't be able to articulate it quickly. And that's what's needed on a
Yeah.
Viva, to articulate something quickly.
Yeah.
Also, I think maybe the last point is to actually give yourself credit. And QB training is hard. It's hard. It's much harder than I thought it would be, actually, and it's hard on many levels. And there is so much information and very little time, and you try to know it all. And the truth is, you won't know it all.
Yeah.
The people that are trying to know it all, I think they'll just tangle themselves, and they perhaps may get disheartened or
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
some sort of imposter syndrome. So don't go down that route. Pat yourself on the back, give yourself a credit, and just don't give up.